Hello and welcome to State of the Economy. Today we have with us India's chief statistician, Mr. TCA Anant, who is with us to really help us decode India's GDP growth, especially during the demonetization period, because that's one issue or one question which was hugely debated by people, academia, students, university students, and the common man. So the reason why we have Mr. TCA Anant in our studio is to really explain to us in very simple terms as to what happened during October to November, the period when demonetization had its impact on consumption, on production, etc. And the big surprise was that during this period, quick estimates made by the statistical department that works with under Mr. TCA Anant came up with a 7% GDP growth projection, with the proviso that that the information based on which this projection was made was not complete, and Mr. Anant was very careful in saying that full information will be received this year sometime, and especially after April, when all the results of companies, 5.5 lakh odd companies, they come out post April, and then of course these figures will be revised and refined. So, so let us try to understand from the chief statistician of India as to how India rode this period of storm, as it were. Welcome to our show, Mr. TCA Anant. Now, initially, both your department, the CSO and RBI had said, this was around I think December odd, that without taking into account the demonetization, the growth, GDP growth forecast or whatever estimate would be in the region of 7 to 7.1%. Am I right? Yeah. Now, later you said post demonetization, you said it would still be 7%, you would maintain it 7%. Now, the question that came to people's mind then is, if you and RBI had said without taking demonetization into account, it was 7.1. So now after taking into account demonetization, why is it more or less the same? So can you just explain to us what were the new findings and the information data that you got for you to reach this conclusion?
See, I think there are two elements to what you are saying, and let me. First of all, insofar as what data is available when we compile advance estimates, that is not influenced by demonetization or thereabouts.
Yeah.
It is basically governed by the structures of the economy by which people report their activities and what indicators are available at what time. Insofar as quarterly estimates and advance estimates are concerned, we have a structured set of data which is available, which relates to, for example, agriculture. We get data on acreage and yield by a calendar which is well laid out and been followed by Agriculture Ministry for the years. For companies, we get, for a limited number of companies, give us advance information about their performance. We also get data on industrial production. We get data on corporate banks borrowing and lending. The data which is available in all of these are well known, and this has not, in that sense, different between demonetization and subsequently. Now, what we did was we compiled GDP from this data, again according to rules and norms which have been laid out.
I fully understand.
Now, people had a certain set of expectations about what is likely to be the impact of demonetization. I think one of the things which happens is these are complex policies. Demonetization influences behavior in a variety of ways. And modelers often end up making simplifying assumptions about how people behave, and they will tend to focus on one aspect of what demonetization did to the exclusion of the complex
And there are many moving parts.
which happened. So, for example, many people who modeled the effect of demonetization focused on only one element of what the demonetization policy did, which is the fact that for a short period of time, there was a shortage of currency in circulation. It is factually correct. Data is available to that effect. You can show how much reduction was there in the currency in circulation. Most modeling approaches took that one data point, assumed that all other behavior would remain as it was without this change, and tried to work out what the implication was. In reality, both individuals and companies reacted to the shortage of currency by a variety of adaptive solutions which would have been worked out by them. And as the chief statistician, I'm not aware of these adaptive solutions. I think this will be subject to detailed research and studies many years from now, and people will document how these were done.
But you could give one or two examples
some examples which are cited in
regard to the informal sector.
For example, in informal sector, many people have said that this sector would have been affected because transactions in this are largely cash based. Now, it is true transactions are cash based, but the informal sector has another attribute which was neglected when this assumption was pointed out. It's also relationship based, and relationship based transactions are also subject to the availability of informal credit. There is a lot of evidence to suggest that maybe there was an expansion in informal credit where customers were given longer time to pay their dues, or suppliers were extended longer supply credit in order to take goods. All of this may well have happened. Now, the point we are making is that we don't analyze, we don't model. We analyze the informal sector from a set of observable indicators which are correlated with their activity. So, for example, we were in agriculture, where there is a significant chunk of the informal sector, we look at acreage planted. There are estimates of yield which are calculated through crop cutting experiments. Those are available. We also have estimates of another chunk of the informal sector comes in trade.
And based on this, you don't see any.
That's right.
Agriculture growth rate.
Agriculture growth rate went up.
Going down, you don't see in this period.
No, in fact, agriculture growth rate seems to have gone up in this period.
Okay.
Retail trade seems to have held up because we look at retail trade from the lens of payments of sales tax, and sales tax collection in this period held up. So, in other words, in order for sales tax payment to have taken place, the traders would have been reporting underlying sales below which on basis of which the tax collections were being made. So, in effect, what is happening is the assumptions of the informal sector were, as I said, based on a single attribute, which is the non-availability of cash. But the fact that non-availability of cash could have been compensated by suitable relationship and behavioral structures were not adequately factored in some of these analyses. At this point, we are not separately demarcating what was the production on the informal sector, what was the production on the formal sector. That is not being done. We are talking about the aggregates.
Okay.
It is possible that in certain segments of the economy, growth may have slowed down. It is possible, but it's very hard.
Which the sales of some sectors also show, right?
With sales of some sector, we, for example, find
two-wheelers, for instance,
two-wheelers, there is data which shows that
negative growth.
The growth was slow. But whether it was on account of demonetization or whether it was on account of some other phenomenon, I'll give you an example. It's important to keep in mind that post-Diwali, two-wheeler sales come down because and automobile vehicle sales also in the month of December come down because there is a year effect which takes place. You don't want to buy a car which is, or a vehicle which is modeled on the previous year if you can wait 1 month and buy it after the year is over. So Diwali tends to see a spike in these expenditures, and after Diwali, in many of these cases, there is a post-Diwali dip. So how much of it was due to demonetization? How much of it was due to post-Diwali dip?
But even January, I think they're showing a little.
That's possible. I have
low
not.
growth,
I have not seen the figures for.
But tell me, Mr. Anand, a lot of small industry hubs clearly saw a big decline in output. Shutters were down, like and workers had gone away for some time temporarily. Some of them may have come back, but you couldn't deny that production in, say, the Juta industry in Agra, Cycle Ludhiana or Moradabad brass, weavers. I was in Mirzapur. I went to carpet weavers. Their production was down at least 40-50%.
See, again.
And this RBI survey also, if you remember, RBI done a survey where they also came up with this conclusion that based on the survey that 40 to 45% decline in output had occurred.
See, I have not seen the RBI survey, so I don't want to comment on what they did or what. But let me point out that it is risky to generalize from this type of empiricism.
I know. I'm just a survey is a survey. It's not hard information.
No, a survey can be hard information provided it is designed according to statistical principle and is there is a random sample which is suitably structured to capture the whole base. Casual survey which is may not be representative. Now, without having knowledge of what the underlying survey is and what was its objective to cover, I don't want to comment. But my point is, we have observables which are aggregated from lots of small actions. Now, inferences from those are quite robust. Take for example.
So it did surprise you also, because when you made your initial estimate without data, that without taking demonetization into account, it could be 7 to 7.2. And then when you, with data, when you saw it was, you estimated 7. So in a sense, it surprised you also from your earlier, what you thought might be and with data.
One of the things which I am very careful in doing is not build in anticipations of what the number should be.
Okay.
The reason is, I feel as a statistician, you should not have a preconceived notion of what the number should be. Because if you have a preconceived notion of what the number should be, then it is likely to introduce a bias in your work. It is much better to approach the number honestly.
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, without demonetization, you already had a number which was in your system, right?
That's true.
Advanced estimates, etc. Right?
No, but we had not, it is not, in fact, when I released the first advance estimate and we had given the estimate for the full year at 7.1%.
Exactly, yeah.
I said, yes, this is based on data till October. It has not included data till November. Yeah. I was very careful in not saying what I expect the impact of November is going to be. I said that I don't speculate on this. And the reason why I don't, because experience has shown me that numbers are very hard in this level of micromanagement, very hard to predict in advance. Theorizing is a complicated task, and one should be careful that one does not oversimplify the economy. The economy is very complex, and there are many factors which come into play. In this particular case, because GDP is a composite figure, and it's a composite derived from a sum over many segments, what its overall figure is going to be is not so easy to do from a simple.
Yeah, which you said even now, what you have estimated is based on available figures.
That's correct.
From the limited universe of companies for which you have data.
Data is currently available.
And you said that the full data will come after April, when the entire universe of companies will reveal their whatever value add output, etc. Right?
No, that is correct, because as of now, all of us have only information from about 3,000 or 5,000 companies, I forget, which file advance information about their performance. the much larger universe of
This
companies
is 5.5 lakh companies
or thereabouts will be closing their accounts as per the statutory provisions.
by 31st March.
No, 31st March is the end of the financial year. Statutorily, they are required to complete their
By
accounts
June or July, right?
September, 30th of September, I think.
Okay.
Company law gives them up to 30th.
So that's when you get the real picture.
That's when we will begin, because please understand, in India, everybody doesn't adhere to the strict date calendar of norms.
Yeah.
Exactly, some people, about 80% will complete their work by about 30th September. A good number of them will routinely delay and will be allowed with virtually no cost. I don't know enough about income tax and company law rules to say they'll file by November, December, January. By next March, of course, everybody would have finalized their accounts, and we will obviously get all of that information. This picture will be included as and when it comes, but it is very, very difficult to prejudge what that picture is going to be. Our experience with working with the relationship between numbers which come up at the advanced stage with the final is that there is a fairly good relationship which exists, and the degree of changes, if you like, are small.
Small, yeah.
Now, we are hoping that the same will continue in the future, and that is the basis of our analysis. We have no other basis to make statements, and that's what it is in front of you.
Tell me, Anant, now moving a little away from the demonetization impact, overall, your data seems to suggest that gross fixed capital formation as a ratio of GDP has been like coming down compared to, say, the previous financial year by 2-3 percentage points, if I'm not mistaken. And non-durable consumption is also very flat. Now, this is happening even before demonetization. There's nothing to do with demonetization. Now, how do you see these trends? Are they changing? Are they about to show some uptake, or what is your sense?
See, the fact that capital formation as a percentage of GDP has been stagnant or declining is certainly true, and it has been there. It correlates with the observation which many people have made that private investment
not picked. Even the finance minister admits this.
Has not picked up. There may be many reasons behind it.
One reason cited is all the big NPAs that banks have, and banks are not lending because of those.
That could be a reason. It could also be a reason that companies in the previous boom had invested a lot in capacity.
Over-invested.
And that capacity is not yet fully utilized because companies, private sector will begin investment only when the future growth prospects in relationship to their current capacity indicate the need to expand capacity significantly.
Exactly, yeah.
So we may well be facing that threshold.
Here I want to ask you something. It's a very interesting point that you made. There was also an impression that after the previous government lost elections in 2014 and the new government came, impression was that a large number of lumpy infrastructure investments, whether in power or other infrastructure sectors, were in the pipeline and were not happening because of regulatory problems with regulatory clearances, etc., which this government came and resolved many of those things, coal auctions, etc. But people thought that those investments fructify. But it appears that even those investments have not fructified. Either the promoters have abandoned them because they have recalculated the return on investments, etc. What is your sense?
See, I'm not completely aware of all the data at the moment. But my sense is that a good number of those investments were being completed. In fact, in power, for example, quite a few of the investments which were languishing for some reasons like lack of coal linkages and so on have been bought on steam and so on. There have also been a lot of investments in power sector in a whole bunch of areas, including renewables and so on. So it's not the case that in power investment has not taken place. Investment has taken place. A lot of the older locked up problems have been resolved. Having said that, in some areas of infrastructure,
should they add up? Should they show an uptick in investments?
Not necessarily, because if you see, it's from the purely accounting sense, if a factory has been made, or if a power plant has been made and it is lying idle because coal is not available. If I solve the coal availability problem, I will bring that power plant into production, but my investment will not go up because I would have already recorded the investment as
the previous year.
In the previous year or whenever the plant was completed. So it is possible to increase capacity, productive capacity.
Maybe it show up in increase in output.
It may show up in output, or it may simply show up as an available capacity without necessarily requiring any fresh investment. I've just sorted out the problems which are preventing it from being used. A lot of that has happened. The capacity available for production of power has increased enormously. The fresh investment will be driven by a separate consideration. It will be driven by the consideration of what the current consumption is relative to the current capacity, what is the growth in future consumption likely to be seen, and from that people will pick their plans.
But do you think demonetization would have psychologically made firms pull back a little for a while, at least for say 3 months, 6 months?
I would doubt that, because most people would have viewed demonetization as a short-term transitory problem to cope with. Investment would be governed more by their perception of long-term constraints. So I don't think demonetization would have affected them negatively insofar as long-term investment.
Because their assessment also is, private investors' assessment also is that consumption demand is not really picked up. It's still kind of flattish.
Yeah, they will be partly driven by what happens to consumption demand, and in many cases, in things like key intermediates and inputs, what is likely to happen to production demand. You know, you can have consumption demand being met by growth in final good production from existing capacity. So from agriculture, to the extent that a large part of final demand is being met from agricultural growth, it may not necessarily translate to an investment demand on its own. But if you expect demand in goods of final consumption, manufacturing goods and so on to be increasing, and you also have a perception that we are going to hit capacity constraints, that is likely to drive the investment cycle further.
That's the other thing, that you start thinking of fresh investments once you exhaust your existing capacity up to say 80-85%, and then
and here please understand, we are in a somewhat complicated world, because we are not in an autarkic world. We are in a world where excess capacity is not only national, it's also international. And your investment,
so the Chinese
overcapacity will also influence our investment decisions, our private sector, when it is investing.
Probably that's a bigger consideration than
it may be a consideration. As I said, this is something which is really not. I am these days as a chief statistician not in my macroeconomist modeling mode, so I'm not thinking about these. But I think these are considerations which would also be weighing on the minds of private investors when they're looking at it. They're looking at the global oversupply. But India is, you know, I think government pushing investment and the government pushing infrastructure, there's a lot of government effort to promote, will, I think, drive investment in eventually. But at the moment, what you're saying, the data does show this.
And how do you see consumption in the period of demonetization, October to December, that quarter? Your data also shows a doubling of consumption growth. How would that have happened there?
See, that's a statistical.
But I'll tell you why, because that period we all psychologically we try to consume less during that period.
No. I'll tell you one thing. There is a statistical element also to this exercise. What we measure in national accounts, we have, as with all accounting systems, we have double entry bookkeeping. So we have the income account and the expenditure account. essentially at the stage of quarterly data, we have data principally on the income side. So income side is assessed by production of various segments. So output of agriculture, manufacturing, services, etc. were calculated, and the income account numbers are put together. This income has to be allocated. Now the allocation at this stage is done by essentially looking at where the increase in production has come. So if agricultural output has gone up, and agricultural output very largely consists of items which go into final consumption. So if, for example, food crops production has gone up, which it did because of the improved monsoon facility, those would have been consumed because that's where they go. So it's a, this is an allocation exercise. Because agriculture output has gone up, a large part of agriculture is consumed. That goes into final consumption.
That would have gone to final. So let us hope, Mr. Anand, that the wider set of data that you get post April or around July, September, especially for the universe of large companies, 5.5 lakh companies, help you further refine these estimates, and we'll wait for that. And meanwhile, thanks very much for talking to us. It was a pleasure having you in our studios.
Thanks.
So that's all we have in this edition of State of the Economy. We'll be back with you next week. Thanks for watching.